Sergeant David Vale had patched up soldiers from 3 different species during his 18 months at Forward Base Echo, but watching an alien princess hold her daughter like any human mother would cradle her child still caught him off guard. The scene unfolded in the base's medical bay, where the sterile efficiency of military healthcare had been temporarily softened by the presence of Princess Liara and 5-year-old Kira Zafrani. The war between humanity and the Zafrani Empire had ground to an exhausted stalemate after 3 years of devastating conflict, leaving both sides searching for an honorable end to hostilities that had consumed entire star systems. Forward Base Echo, positioned on the contested moon of Kepler 9b, had become an unlikely nexus for prisoner exchanges and ceasefire negotiations, neutral ground where enemies could meet without losing face. David adjusted the medical scanner in his hands, trying to look busy while observing the interaction between mother and daughter. Princess Liara possessed the characteristic features of Zafrani nobility, translucent blue-tinted skin that seemed to glow with internal light, silver hair that moved as if underwater, and eyes that shifted color based on emotional state. Her daughter shared those ethereal qualities but with the added vulnerability that made David's medic instincts activate regardless of species classifications. The exchange will proceed according to the established protocols, Colonel Martinez was explaining to Princess Liara, his tone carrying the careful neutrality that had become standard for interspecies diplomacy. We have 47 Zafrani personnel ready for repatriation, including 3 officers of significant rank. And we returned 38 human soldiers, along with the medical supplies requested by your command, Princess Liara replied, her voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate with the medical equipment around them. All personnel have been treated according to the conventions established at the Geneva Protocols. David had read the reports about Princess Liara. Military intelligence described her as both a skilled warrior and a pragmatic negotiator, someone who favored ending the conflict through diplomacy rather than pursuing the total victory demanded by Zafrani hardliners. What the reports hadn't mentioned was how she looked at her daughter with the same protective tenderness that David had seen in human mothers throughout the medical facilities where he'd served. Kira sat quietly beside her mother, her large eyes, currently a curious golden color, taking in the alien environment with the adaptability that seemed universal among children. She wore a smaller version of Zafrani formal robes, but her posture suggested someone trying very hard to be brave in circumstances that probably felt overwhelming. Mama, Kira said softly, using what David's universal translator rendered as standard Galactic, the sad feeling people are everywhere here. Princess Liara's attention immediately focused on her daughter, and David caught the brief flicker of concern that crossed her features. Remember what we discussed about controlling your perceptions, little star. Sometimes other people's emotions can feel very strong. David's medical training had included basic information about Zafrani physiology, including their species' natural empathic abilities. Children often displayed stronger psychic sensitivity than adults, which could be both a gift and a burden in environments filled with trauma and conflict. Dr. Vale, Colonel Martinez said, and David realized his observation had been noticed. Princess Liara, this is Sergeant David Vale, our senior combat medic. He's been responsible for treating both human and Zafrani wounded during the ceasefire periods. David offered what he hoped was an appropriate greeting, still uncertain about Zafrani customs despite months of treating their soldiers. Your Highness. I hope our medical facilities have been adequate for your people's needs. More than adequate, Princess Liara said, her eyes shifting to a warmer amber shade. Several of our soldiers have specifically mentioned your unconventional approach to patient care. Unconventional how? David asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. You treat Zafrani wounded with the same priority and attention as human personnel, she said. According to our soldiers, you've risked disciplinary action on multiple occasions to provide medical care regardless of species classifications. David felt heat rise in his cheeks. Medical need doesn't recognize political boundaries, Your Highness. Injured people require treatment, period. Princess Liara studied his face with an intensity that suggested she was evaluating more than his medical qualifications. An admirable philosophy, Sergeant Vale. One that suggests wisdom beyond military protocol. Before David could respond, Kira tugged on her mother's robes and whispered something in what sounded like native Zafrani. Princess Liara's expression shifted through several emotional states: concern, sadness, and something that looked like difficult resolution. Kira senses emotional disturbance among the base personnel, Princess Liara explained quietly. Strong feelings of anger and deception. Colonel Martinez frowned. Deception? Can you be more specific? Child empaths often detect intentions that adults have learned to hide, Princess Liara said, her protective instincts clearly warring with the implications of her daughter's abilities. Kira, can you tell us more about what you're sensing? The little girl looked around the medical bay with an expression far too serious for someone her age. Some people here are planning something bad. They don't want the fighting to stop. A chill ran down David's spine as he processed the implications. Intelligence reports had warned about extremist factions on both sides who opposed the peace negotiations, but the idea that saboteurs might be operating within Forward Base Echo raised the stakes considerably. Your Highness, Colonel Martinez said, his military bearing sharpening with concern, are you suggesting there may be hostile elements among our personnel? I'm suggesting that my daughter's abilities, while still developing, have proven remarkably accurate in the past, Princess Liara said. But asking a child to identify potential threats places an enormous psychological burden on her. David watched as Princess Liara pulled Kira closer, her maternal instincts clearly struggling with the military necessity of using her daughter's gifts. The sight of that universal parental protectiveness, regardless of species, reminded him of his own mother's attempts to shield him and his younger brother from the realities of their father's military deployments. Mama, Kira said, looking up at Princess Liara with trust that made David's chest tight, the kind doctor man doesn't have bad feelings. He wants to help people. Princess Liara's eyes met David's, and he saw something in her expression that combined gratitude with a deeper recognition. Thank you, Kira. It's good to know that some people here share our hopes for peace. The exchange proceeded according to schedule, with both sides maintaining the careful formality that kept ceasefire negotiations functional. But as the afternoon progressed, David found himself watching Princess Liara and her daughter with growing concern for their safety and growing admiration for the courage it must have taken to bring a child into this environment. As the official ceremonies concluded and personnel began preparing for departure, David was surprised when Princess Liara approached him privately. Kira stayed close to her mother's side, her golden eyes now showing flecks of silver that suggested fatigue from processing so many conflicting emotions. Sergeant Vale, Princess Liara said, her voice carrying a formality that somehow felt different from the diplomatic protocols she'd used earlier. I want to thank you for your service to both our peoples. Just doing my job, Your Highness, David said, though something in her tone suggested this conversation carried more weight than casual gratitude. Princess Liara looked down at Kira, who had moved to stand directly between them as if seeking protection from both adults. Tears began forming in the princess's eyes as she pulled her daughter into an embrace that seemed to carry all the weight of a mother's love and fear. I love you, little star, she whispered, holding Kira with the intensity of someone who might not have many more chances for such moments. Remember that you are precious beyond measure, no matter what happens. Kira hugged her mother tightly, her small voice muffled against Princess Liara's robes. I love you too, Mama. Don't be scared. The kind feelings will win. David felt like an intruder witnessing such an intimate moment, but something about the scene made it impossible to look away. The sight of unconditional love between parent and child transcended every political and biological boundary that separated their species. Princess Liara released her daughter and turned to David, tears still visible on her cheeks. She leaned close enough that her words would be private, her voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate with something deeper than hearing. When the time comes, she whispered, remember that some promises transcend war. Before David could ask what she meant, Princess Liara straightened and resumed her formal bearing, taking Kira's hand as they prepared to depart with the returning Zafrani personnel. David stood in the medical bay long after they'd gone, replaying those whispered words and wondering what promise an alien princess thought a human combat medic could keep in a war that had already cost both sides more than anyone should have to sacrifice. The morning after Princess Liara's departure brought news that made David understand why she'd looked at her daughter with such desperate tenderness. Intelligence reports confirmed what Kira's empathic abilities had detected. Extremist factions from both species were planning coordinated attacks designed to sabotage the peace negotiations and reignite the war with unprecedented savagery. "We're looking at a conspiracy that spans both command structures," Colonel Martinez explained during the emergency briefing, his usually calm demeanor showing cracks of strain. "Human supremacist elements working with Safrani military hardliners who believe the war can still be won through total victory." David sat in the briefing room surrounded by officers whose expressions ranged from grim determination to barely concealed panic, trying to process how quickly their hope for peace had transformed into a race against coordinated treachery. "Sir," Captain Williams asked, "what's the timeline for these planned attacks?" "Intelligence suggests they're targeting the formal peace signing ceremony scheduled for next week," Martinez replied. "Kill the negotiators from both sides, blame the opposing species, and justify resuming hostilities with no restraints on weapons deployment." The implications hit David like a physical blow. The peace ceremony would include civilian diplomats, cultural representatives, and, he realized with growing horror, probably families of high-ranking officials who supported the treaty. "Colonel," David said, raising his hand with the uncomfortable awareness that his medical rank didn't typically qualify him for strategic discussions, "Princess Liara mentioned that her daughter's abilities had detected deception among base personnel. If there are conspirators here, then we're sitting in the middle of a potential kill zone," Martinez finished grimly. "Which is why Princess Liara has requested permission to return with a small diplomatic team to assist in identifying security threats. She wants to bring her daughter back here?" David asked, his medic instincts immediately protesting the idea of exposing a child to active conspiracy and potential violence. "She wants to bring the only person whose abilities can reliably detect deception and malicious intent among our personnel," Martinez corrected. "Kira's empathic sensitivity makes her invaluable for counterintelligence work." David felt sick thinking about a 5-year-old being used as a living lie detector in an environment where the wrong answer could mean assassination attempts. "Sir, with respect, using a child's psychic abilities to scan for hostile intentions could cause severe psychological trauma. Which is why Princess Liara specifically requested you as Kira's primary caretaker during the investigation," Martinez said, handing David a datapad containing official orders that made his stomach drop. "Apparently, her daughter formed an attachment to you during yesterday's exchange." David stared at the orders that officially assigned him as liaison and protective escort for a Zafrani princess and her empathically gifted daughter. "I'm a combat medic, sir. I don't have training in child psychology or counterintelligence operations." "You have training in treating trauma and protecting people under extreme stress," Martinez pointed out. "Plus, according to Princess Liara, you're one of the few humans her daughter trusts instinctively." The transport carrying Princess Liara's diplomatic team arrived 6 hours later, and David was waiting in the landing bay with a medical kit and a growing sense that his military career had just taken an unexpected turn toward responsibilities he'd never imagined. Princess Liara emerged from the transport wearing practical field gear instead of formal robes, but her bearing still radiated the authority that came with royal training and combat experience. Kira stayed close beside her, clutching a small stuffed animal that looked like it had seen better days but provided obvious comfort. "Sergeant Vale," Princess Liara said, approaching him with an expression that mixed gratitude with concern. "Thank you for accepting this assignment. I know it's outside your normal duties." "Happy to help, Your Highness," David said, kneeling to bring himself to Kira's eye level. "Hello again, Kira. How are you feeling today?" The little girl studied his face with those remarkable golden eyes, then smiled with the kind of pure trust that made David determined to protect her regardless of the personal cost. "Hello, Dr. David. Mama says you're going to help keep me safe while I help find the bad-feeling people." "That's right," David said, noting how Princess Liara's eyes shifted to a worried blue at her daughter's matter-of-fact description of their mission. And I want you to tell me immediately if you start feeling overwhelmed by other people's emotions, okay? Okay, Kira agreed, then added with the blunt honesty of childhood, some of the people here have very angry feelings about Mama and me being here. They don't want Safrani people in their home. David felt Princess Liara's tension spike, and he realized that dealing with regular military prejudice would be complicated enough without adding the pressure of identifying potential traitors and assassins. Some people have trouble accepting new situations, David said carefully. But our job is to focus on the people who want peace for everyone, human and Safrani alike. Their first day of investigation involved Kira meeting with key base personnel while David monitored her emotional state and Princess Liara coordinated with intelligence officers. The process was exhausting for everyone involved. Kira had to endure exposure to the complex and often negative emotions of dozens of adults, while David found himself serving as translator between a child's empathic impressions and military intelligence requirements. Lieutenant Harrison feels angry and sad, but not dangerous, Kira reported after meeting with the communications officer. He lost someone important in the fighting, but he doesn't want more people to die. What about Major Caldwell? Princess Liara asked gently. He's scared, Kira said, her small face scrunching with concentration. Scared of Safrani people, scared of the war ending, scared of something bad happening to people he cares about. David exchanged glances with Princess Liara, both of them recognizing that fear could motivate both heroic protection and desperate betrayal. As the day progressed, David found himself impressed by how Princess Liara balanced her roles as military officer, protective mother, and diplomatic representative. She never pushed Kira beyond the child's emotional limits, always providing comfort and reassurance while extracting the information necessary for their security investigation. You're good at this, David told her during a break while Kira napped in the base's guest quarters. Balancing her needs with the mission requirements. I'm terrified every moment that I'm asking too much of her, Princess Liara admitted, her royal composure cracking enough to reveal the worried mother underneath. But if we don't identify the conspirators, both our species could be facing decades more of warfare. She's stronger than you think, David said, watching Kira sleep with the peaceful expression that seemed universal among children. And she trusts you completely. That trust is probably what keeps her grounded when she's processing difficult emotions. Princess Liara looked at him with an expression that suggested she was reassessing his qualifications for the assignment. You have experience with children, Sergeant. Younger brother, David said, feeling the familiar ache that accompanied thoughts of Tommy. He was killed at Proxima Station 2 years ago. Age 19. I'm sorry, Princess Liara said, her eyes shifting to a compassionate silver. Loss of family, it changes how we understand what truly matters. What about you? David asked. Kira's father. Killed defending a civilian evacuation on Kepler-12, she said quietly. He believed that protecting innocent life was more important than military victory. It's why I support the peace negotiations. They sat in comfortable silence, two people from different species united by loss and the shared responsibility of protecting a child whose abilities might determine whether their peoples found peace or continued destroying each other. David, Princess Liara said, using his first name for the first time, when I whispered to you yesterday about promises that transcend war. What did you mean? David asked. I meant that if something happens to me during this investigation, I need to know that someone will protect Kira, she said, her voice carrying the weight of a mother's worst fears. Someone who sees her as a child first and a strategic asset second. David looked at the sleeping little girl, then at her mother whose courage in bringing her daughter into danger was matched only by her desperation to find a peaceful solution to their conflict. Nothing's going to happen to you, he said firmly. But if it did, I'd protect her with my life. Princess Liara's smile carried gratitude and something deeper, recognition that some bonds form quickly under pressure and prove stronger than the circumstances that created them. Thank you, she said. That promise means more than you know. The breakthrough in their investigation came on the third day, when Kira's empathic screening revealed something that made David's blood run cold and Princess Liara's eyes shift to the dangerous red that preceded Zafrani combat responses. 3 human officers and 2 Zafrani military attaches were working together to ensure the peace negotiations failed in the most catastrophic way possible. "The bad-feeling people want to hurt the important visitors," Kira said, her small voice carrying exhaustion from days of processing adult emotions that ranged from grief to rage to murderous intent. "They think if they make it look like the other people did bad things, everyone will fight again." David held Kira while she recovered from the emotional strain of identifying the conspirators, her small body trembling with the aftershocks of encountering minds filled with deliberate malice. Princess Liara paced the secure briefing room like a caged predator, her protective instincts warring with her duty to extract every possible detail from her daughter's abilities. "Can you tell us anything else about their plans?" Princess Liara asked gently, kneeling beside David's chair to bring herself to Kira's eye level. "They have weapons that don't belong here," Kira said, pressing her face against David's shoulder for comfort. "Hidden weapons that feel wrong. Like they're meant to hurt lots of people at once." Colonel Martinez leaned forward, his expression grim. "Kira, when you say wrong, can you describe what that feeling is like?" "Like the angry feelings are stuck inside metal things," she said, lifting her head to look at the assembled adults with eyes that seemed too wise for someone her age. "The weapons have hate inside them, but it's not people hate. It's sleeping hate that gets woken up when the weapons work." David felt Princess Liara's sharp intake of breath and realized she understood something about Kira's description that military intelligence hadn't grasped yet. "Psychically programmed ordnance," Princess Liara said, her voice tight with controlled anger. "Weapons designed to amplify emotional trauma in survivors. They're not just planning to kill the negotiators, they want to create psychological wounds that make peace impossible for generations. That's a war crime by any civilized standard," Martinez said. "Using psychic weapons against civilian populations violates every treaty both our species have signed. Which is exactly why they're planning to blame the attacks on extremists from the opposing side," Princess Liara said. "Create maximum psychological damage, then claim the other species committed atrocities that justify unlimited retaliation." David looked down at Kira, who had fallen asleep against his shoulder, exhausted by the strain of processing so much deliberate malevolence. "She can't keep doing this," he said quietly. "The emotional toll of scanning for hostile intentions is breaking her down." "I know," Princess Liara said, her maternal anguish evident despite her efforts to maintain military composure. "But we need to locate those weapons before the ceremony, and Kira's abilities are the only reliable way to identify where they're hidden." "What if there was another way?" David asked, an idea forming that combined his medical training with what he'd learned about Zafrani empathic abilities. "What if instead of having Kira scan people directly, we used her abilities to identify the emotional resonance from the weapons themselves?" Princess Liara's eyes shifted to an intrigued Amber. "Explain. You said the weapons have psychic programming." "Hate that's been embedded in the technology," David said, carefully adjusting his position so Kira could sleep more comfortably. "If they're radiating negative emotional energy, Kira might be able to detect them without having to interface with the people who placed them." "That's actually possible," Princess Liara said slowly. "Psychically programmed devices do create detectable emotional fields. It would be like asking her to sense the weapon's presence rather than the conspirators' intentions. And less traumatic for her psychologically," David added. "She'd be detecting object signatures rather than processing human malice." Their modified approach proved both more effective and less emotionally damaging for Kira. Moving through the base in systematic sweeps, she was able to identify 3 locations where psychically programmed weapons had been concealed. Devices that conventional security scans had missed because they were designed to appear as standard military equipment until activated. "There's sleeping angry feelings in the big meeting room," Kira reported, pointing toward the main conference hall where the peace ceremony would take place. "And in the place where people eat together, and in the place where the flying machines sleep." "Conference hall, mess hall," and Hangar Bay, David translated, feeling sick as he realized the scope of the planned attack. They're targeting every location where peace supporters would gather. Maximum casualties among both diplomatic teams, Princess Liara said, her voice carrying the controlled fury of someone whose child had been used to uncover a plot to massacre civilians. Plus enough collateral damage to make peace negotiations impossible for the foreseeable future. The discovery of the weapons led to a tense confrontation when Colonel Martinez ordered the arrest of the identified conspirators. The human officers surrendered without resistance, but the Zafrani military attaches activated some kind of psychic defense that created a feedback loop through Kira's empathic abilities. David found himself holding a screaming 5-year-old whose nervous system was being overwhelmed by artificially amplified emotions, while Princess Liara fought to neutralize the psychic attack without causing permanent damage to her daughter's developing abilities. She's receiving the full emotional impact of their psychic defenses, Princess Liara said, her hands glowing with the bioluminescent patterns that indicated active use of Zafrani mental disciplines. I can't block it completely without risking damage to her natural empathic development. What can I do? David asked, holding Kira while she thrashed in apparent agony from emotions that weren't her own. Stay calm, Princess Liara said, her voice strained with effort. Your emotional state affects how she processes what she's receiving. Be her anchor to stability. David focused on projecting every calming technique his medical training had taught him, turning himself into a source of steady reassurance while Princess Liara worked to sever the psychic connection that was causing Kira's distress. The process seemed to take hours but probably lasted only minutes before the child's screaming subsided into exhausted sobbing. It's over, little star, Princess Liara whispered, taking Kira from David's arms and holding her with the fierce protectiveness that transcended species boundaries. You're safe now. The bad feelings can't hurt you anymore. Mama, Kira said, her voice hoarse from screaming, I don't want to feel other people's emotions anymore. It hurts too much. David watched Princess Liara's face cycle through every emotion a parent could experience when their child suffered because of adult decisions and conflicts. The sight of that universal parental anguish made him understand why she'd been so desperate to find a peaceful solution to their war. I know, sweetheart, Princess Liara said, tears flowing freely down her cheeks. But you helped save so many people by being brave enough to help us find the weapons. You're the bravest little girl in the galaxy. Will the fighting stop now? Kira asked, looking between her mother and David with exhausted hope. The bad people who wanted the fighting to continue have been stopped, David said carefully. But there's still one more ceremony where the important people will sign papers that say the fighting is over forever. Will you keep me safe during the important ceremony? Kira asked, her golden eyes fixed on David with trust that made his chest tight with protective determination. I'll keep you safe, David promised, meaning every word with the kind of certainty that transcended military orders and diplomatic protocols. Your mother and I both will. Princess Liara looked at him with an expression that combined gratitude with something deeper, recognition that their shared experience of protecting Kira had created bonds that would outlast the war that had brought them together. David, she said quietly, while Kira dozed fitfully in her arms, after the ceremony, after the peace treaty is signed, would you consider remaining as part of Kira's life? She's going to need help processing what she's experienced, and you're the only human she trusts completely. David looked at the exhausted child who had sacrificed her emotional well-being to prevent a massacre, then at her mother whose courage in bringing Kira into danger had been matched by her desperation to protect all the children, human and Zafrani alike, who would suffer if the war continued. I'd be honored, he said, realizing that his answer was changing not just his career but his entire understanding of where he belonged in a galaxy where peace was possible but required constant protection from those who preferred the certainty of conflict to the complexity of cooperation. The peace ceremony was scheduled to proceed despite the discovery of the conspiracy, with both governments insisting that allowing terrorists to derail diplomatic progress would validate every extremist argument about the impossibility of interspecies cooperation. David found himself assigned as Kira's personal guardian during the event, a responsibility that felt simultaneously natural and terrifying given the stakes involved. The ceremony will include representatives from 14 different species, Colonel Martinez explained during the final security briefing. Over 300 dignitaries, plus media representatives and cultural observers. Any one of them could be a potential threat we haven't identified. Princess Liara sat beside David in the briefing room, her attention divided between the security protocols and monitoring Kira's emotional state as the child played quietly with her stuffed animal. The past week had taken a visible toll on all three of them, but especially on Kira, whose empathic abilities had been pushed to their limits identifying threats that adult minds were trying to hide. Kira won't be able to provide active scanning during the ceremony, Princess Liara said firmly. Her abilities need time to recover from the psychic attack, and exposing her to the emotional chaos of a large gathering could cause permanent damage. Understood, Martinez replied. Our security protocols will rely on conventional methods and the intelligence you've already provided. David looked down at Kira, who seemed smaller and more fragile than when he'd first met her. The brave little girl who had helped uncover a conspiracy was now dealing with the psychological aftermath of processing so much adult malice and deception. How are you feeling today, Kira? David asked gently. Tired, she said without looking up from her toy. And scared that the bad feelings will come back. The bad people have been taken away, Princess Liara said, kneeling beside her daughter's chair. They can't hurt you or anyone else anymore. But there might be other bad people, Kira said with the blunt realism of childhood. There are always people who want to hurt others when they're scared or angry. David felt his heart break a little at hearing such wisdom from someone who should still believe that adults could protect children from all harm. The war had taken that innocence from too many young people across multiple species. The ceremony itself took place in Forward Base Echo's largest hangar, which had been converted into a diplomatic venue with seating arrangements that accommodated the diverse physiological needs of 14 different species. David positioned himself near the family section where Princess Liara and Kira sat with other high-ranking officials and their dependents. The documents being signed today represent more than just an end to hostilities, the lead human negotiator announced to the assembled crowd. They establish frameworks for cooperation that will benefit all our species for generations to come. David watched the formal proceedings while keeping most of his attention on Kira, who seemed to be handling the emotional complexity of the large gathering better than expected. The child leaned against her mother's side, occasionally whispering observations about the people around them but without the distress that had characterized her earlier empathic work. The Altarian delegate feels very happy, Kira reported quietly. And the big insect people are excited about something called trade opportunities. That's good, David said, relieved that she was detecting positive emotions rather than the hostility and deception they'd been hunting for the past week. The ceremony proceeded smoothly through the first hour, with representatives from each species adding their formal approval to the peace accords. David was beginning to relax when Kira suddenly stiffened against her mother's side, her golden eyes going wide with alarm. Something's wrong, she whispered, her voice carrying the same urgency that had preceded their discovery of the hidden weapons. There's new bad feelings. Very close. Princess Liara immediately went on alert, her hand moving to the concealed weapon she carried despite the diplomatic setting. Where, little star? Can you tell me where the bad feelings are coming from? Before Kira could answer, explosions erupted throughout the hangar as backup conspirators activated devices that the security sweeps had missed. David's combat medic training took over as he grabbed Kira and shielded her with his body while Princess Liara moved to protect the other civilians in their section. Secondary attack, someone was shouting over the chaos. Multiple explosive devices activated simultaneously. The hangar filled with smoke and the screams of injured delegates from multiple species, but David realized that the explosions weren't designed to kill, they were meant to create panic and confusion that would mask whatever the real attack was intended to accomplish. David, Princess Liara called out, her voice carrying over the chaos, get Kira to the medical bay. This isn't over yet. What about you? David asked, lifting Kira while scanning for the safest route through the panicking crowd. I'm going to find whoever's behind this secondary attack, she said, her eyes blazing with the red that indicated Zafrani combat readiness. Keep her safe. David was halfway to the medical bay when Kira screamed with the same intensity that had accompanied the psychic attack from the arrested conspirators. This time, however, her distress seemed focused on something specific rather than generalized emotional overload. "The very bad man is going to hurt Mama," she sobbed, clinging to David with desperate strength. "He has a weapon that makes people disappear. He's going to use it on Mama because she stopped his friends." David felt ice flood his veins as he realized what Kira's empathic abilities were detecting. Somewhere in the chaos of the hangar, a final conspirator was targeting Princess Liara for assassination, probably with some kind of disintegration weapon that would ensure no evidence remained of the attack. "Kira," David said, changing direction toward the hangar despite every instinct screaming at him to get the child to safety, "can you tell me where the bad man is? Can you guide me to him?" "You can't fight him," Kira said, her small face streaked with tears. "He'll hurt you too." "I'm not going to fight him," David said, though he was lying and suspected Kira's abilities would detect the deception. "I'm going to warn your mother so she can protect herself." What actually happened was that David followed Kira's empathic guidance through the smoke-filled hangar until he spotted the figure in maintenance coveralls who was stalking Princess Liara with a weapon that seemed to bend light around itself in unnatural ways. "Liara," David shouted, using her name for the first time as he sprinted toward her position. "Behind you. Disintegration weapon." Princess Liara spun and dove for cover just as the assassin fired, the energy beam missing her by inches but vaporizing a section of the hangar wall where she'd been standing. David didn't remember making the conscious decision to charge the gunman. His body simply moved with the protective instincts that had been forged by months of treating wounded soldiers and weeks of caring for Kira. The impact of tackling an armed assassin while holding a 5-year-old was about as graceful as it sounded, which was to say not at all. David managed to knock the weapon from the man's hands while shielding Kira from the worst of the collision, but the device's power cell exploded on impact with the deck plating. The last thing David remembered was the sensation of being lifted and thrown by an energy discharge that felt like being struck by lightning, followed by Kira's screams and Princess Liara's voice calling his name with a desperation that cut through the growing darkness. He woke up 3 days later in what appeared to be a Zafrani medical facility, his body wrapped in some kind of bioregenerative cocoon that pulsed with healing energy. Princess Liara sat beside his bed, her hand resting on his through the cocoon's membrane, while Kira slept curled up in a chair nearby. "You saved my life," Princess Liara said when she noticed his eyes were open. "And nearly got yourself killed protecting Kira while you did it. Is she okay?" David asked, his voice hoarse from whatever medical procedures he'd undergone. "She's fine. Scared for you, but physically unharmed," Princess Liara said, tears flowing freely down her cheeks. "David, the explosion damaged your spine and several major organs. Human medical technology couldn't repair the damage, so I authorized emergency treatment using Zafrani bioregeneration." "What does that mean?" David asked, though he suspected the answer would involve complications he wasn't prepared for. "It means your body has been enhanced with Zafrani biological systems," she said carefully. "You'll live, and eventually you'll be healthier than you were before the injury, but you're not entirely human anymore." David processed this information while watching Kira sleep, her small face peaceful in a way it hadn't been since they'd started investigating the conspiracy. "Will I be able to continue caring for her?" "If you want to," Princess Liara said, her voice carrying hope mixed with uncertainty. "The biological modifications mean you'll live significantly longer than normal humans, and you'll have limited empathic abilities that will help you understand Kira's emotional needs." "You're asking me to join your family," David said, recognizing the implications of what she was describing. "I'm asking you to accept what you've already become," Princess Liara corrected. "When you risked your life to protect both of us, you proved that some bonds transcend species, politics, and the circumstances that create them." David looked around the medical facility, then at Princess Liara whose courage in pursuing peace had cost her so much, and finally at Kira who had sacrificed her innocence to help save both their species from continued warfare. The peace treaty was signed, Princess Liara continued. Both governments are using our investigation as evidence of why continued cooperation is essential. The war is officially over. And unofficially? Unofficially, there will always be people who prefer conflict to the hard work of building understanding between different species, she said. Which is why Kira will need protection and guidance as she grows up in a galaxy that's still learning how to be peaceful. David felt the bioregenerative cocoon responding to his emotional state, pulsing with warmth that seemed connected to Princess Liara's presence. When you whispered to me about promises that transcend war, I meant that some commitments become part of who we are, regardless of the political circumstances that created them, she said. Protecting Kira, helping her use her abilities for healing rather than warfare, building bridges between our species, those are promises that matter more than any official treaty. 6 months later, David stood in a garden on the Zafrani homeworld, watching Kira use her empathic abilities to help traumatized war veterans from both species process their psychological wounds. The child who had once screamed from the emotional overload of detecting murderous conspirators now guided healing sessions where former enemies learned to understand each other's perspectives. She's remarkable, David told Princess Liara, who had become simply Liara to him, though she remained Your Highness to most of the galaxy. Her ability to transform pain into understanding, it's like watching someone rewrite the fundamental assumptions about how different species can relate to each other. She learned it from you, Liara said, her hand finding his with the easy familiarity that had developed between them. Your commitment to treating everyone with equal care, regardless of species classification, that's what taught her that healing was more important than identifying threats. David watched Kira help a human veteran and a Zafrani soldier work through their shared trauma, her small hands glowing with the bioluminescent patterns that indicated active empathic assistance. The sight filled him with pride that had nothing to do with his own achievements and everything to do with watching someone he loved become the best possible version of herself. Do you ever regret it? Liara asked quietly. Giving up your human life to become part of an alien family? David looked at her face, noting how her eyes had settled into the warm amber that indicated deep contentment, then at Kira who looked up from her healing work to wave at them with uninhibited joy. I didn't give up my human life, he said, squeezing Liara's hand. I found a family that helped me become more human than I ever could have been alone. The promise Princess Liara had whispered to him that first day, that some commitments transcend war, had proven true in ways none of them could have anticipated. Their unconventional family served as living proof that love could bridge any distance, heal any wound, and build connections strong enough to support peace across the vast spaces between different worlds.